For this lesson, you will need a pencil and a piece of paper. Hello everyone, I hope that you're all okay. Today for our Spanish lesson, we're going to continue to focus on the city and the countryside and look at some of the vocabulary that some of you learnt last week in our Spanish task that you did. I'm going to share with you the learning objective and the success criteria. Really, this is the learning objective and the success criteria for the next few weeks. So as we look to build upon being able to write sentences, being able to write paragraphs using the vocabulary that we'll learn in today's lesson. So we're learning to describe where we live so that we can hold a conversation in Spanish. Now, for your success criteria, your bronze is to say where you live using learned vocabulary. We're going to start looking at those two kind of possibilities in the city or the countryside. The silver, to give extra detail about where you live. So obviously we've learned this year so far about buildings, which you may be able to use again. You've learned obviously about directions as well, which again is something that you can retrieve from what we did before Christmas time to use in this learning that we're going to do over the next couple of weeks. And then the goal to hold a conversation about where you live. We'll think of a way that we can do that remotely, and obviously we'll adapt to be able to do that really well. Okay, so we're going to start looking at, I'll start the lesson by looking at the same video that lots of you were able to look at last week. I know that there were some of you, however, that for some reason weren't able to access it. So I've put the link on to the Seesaw activity. The link's also on the screen at the moment, which you won't be able to click on because it's a pre-recorded video, but you may be able to type it in into your URL part at the top to obviously search for the video. The video is all about the city, or generally mainly about the city of Valencia, and there's lots and lots of different Spanish vocabulary that you will be able to learn through listening to the child in the video talking about where he lives. Muy bien, so I hope that you enjoyed the video and found it useful. Obviously the video spoke mainly and predominantly about Valencia, which is a city, or in Spanish is La Ciudad. We'll talk about the pronunciation in a moment. The video also talked briefly about the countryside, and somebody had moved from the countryside, which in Spanish is El Campo, which lots of you found out last week, which is brilliant. So what I've done is I've put the vocabulary that you will need for today into a table, and as you can see there is one side which is El Campo and one side which is La Ciudad, which you probably sat there thinking it's countryside and it's a city. Now, quite often, right across the world, in the countryside, it's the polar opposite to what life is like in the city, which is no different in Spanish and obviously no different from the video that you've just seen. So let's have a look at the pronunciation of some of the words and how they're different between El Campo and La Ciudad. Okay, so let's start off with El Campo, which is countryside. So let's have a look at the pronunciation for that. El Campo. El Campo. Muy bien. Now, obviously, it's pronounced how it looks on the screen, which is really helpful. Now, obviously, we've spoken quite a bit about whether words in Spanish are masculine or feminine. Which do you think it is and why? Okay, muy bien. If you said it's a masculine word, it's El and it ends in the letter O, which tells us it's masculine. Brilliant. So let's have a look at some of the possibilities of what life might be like in the countryside or El Campo. You may well see that there is poca gente. Poca gente. Poca gente. Muy bien. Remember, and it's really easy to say gente, like you probably would in English, but in Spanish it's more like a gente. Muy bien. Now that means that there's not many people, which obviously in the countryside it's very spacious. Not many people live there. Okay. Next one is caballos. 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 Muy bien, and the double L is like a Y sound in Spanish, and that is horses. Obviously, in the countryside, in all the fields, that's something you may possibly see. Next one, montañas. 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 Muy bien is mountains. Now, you can't see it on the screen at the moment, but the second N in montañas should have a tilde, those little wiggly lines on top of it. Unfortunately, I couldn't find the way to add it to the screen after I'd done the video. But basically, that obviously makes the ñ sound, which we talked about before, so montañas. Okay, next one is muy estrechos. Muy estrechos. Muy estrechos. Muy bien, which is very narrow, and obviously you may well see the paths, the space by the lakes, by the rivers, between the trees. Obviously that can apply for as well. Next one, caminas. Caminas, which is roads. Obviously you wouldn't see many roads, however that's obviously appropriate. Equally, it may be that you blend together then muy estrechos, muy estrechas, it would need to be caminas, which would be very narrow roads. And the final one, muy tranquilo. Muy tranquilo, which is very quiet. Tranquilo on its own just means quiet, but muy means very. Muy tranquilo is very quiet. Okay, let's have a look at La Ciudad then. Obviously the pronunciation is slightly different for this one. With El Campo we said k, but with Ciudad it's a th sound. Okay, is it masculine or feminine word, and why? Muy bien, it's a feminine word, and because it's la. Obviously it doesn't end in an a, which kind of spoils the pattern a little bit that we talked about before. However, the penultimate letter in Ciudad is a, so that gives us a little bit of a clue as to the fact that it's a feminine word. Okay, let's go through the vocabulary for this then. Obviously you'll notice that obviously it's kind of the opposite from El Campo, so there's not too much difference with it, but you'll also be able to see the opposite language, which is obviously really useful for you. So the first one is mucha gente. Mucha gente. Mucha gente. Muy bien, which means a lot of people, which is obviously the opposite to the El Campo, the countryside. Next one, muchas coches. Muchas coches, which is a lot of cars, which obviously there are in a city. Next one, not necessarily in our cities, however, similar in Spain, or there are in Spain, muchas playas. Muchas playas, which is a lot of beaches. Muy bien. Okay, next one, obviously the opposite, muy anchos. Muy anchos, which is very wide, and then caminas we know from before is roads, so muy anchos caminas is very wide roads. And then the final one, I like this word actually, is muy ruidosa. Muy ruidosa. Muy ruidosa. Muy bien, which is very noisy. Which again, because of all the cars, because of the amount of people, is a result of that in the city, or La Ciudad. Okay, at this point, if you feel like you're a little bit unsure over some of the vocabulary, what I'd probably suggest to do is rewind the video to when we first come onto this page, and then just go over the vocabulary again and again and again until you get used to it, until you got the pronunciation correct. The only other piece of vocabulary that I'm going to say to you today, or going to reintroduce you to, is I, which is there is or there are. Now remember that from when we looked at buildings. So for example, if you were to say there are not many people in the campo, you might say en el campo hay poca gente. In the countryside there is not many people. Really important with pronunciation for this one, because we kept falling into the trap before Christmas of saying hey for it, but it's actually pronounced just like a capital I, as in I am going to the park. So remember that when you're pronouncing it too. Okay, so for your task today, really simple and really straightforward. I want you to practice using that vocabulary. You need to choose a way that you need to, or that you want to, present that vocabulary that you've learned in today's lesson, and just remember to include I, which is there is or there are. It's up to you. You can either present it in a table, just like it is on here, but make sure, please, that you've got the Spanish and the English next to it so you can refer back to it for next week. You could just simply do it in a list if you wanted. That'd be absolutely fine as well. Equally, if you want to record yourself saying the vocabulary over the image that you use on Seesaw, then that'd be absolutely brilliant to hear your pronunciation as well. Okay, so look forward to seeing your work on Seesaw. If you've got any questions, then please just ask, and I will see you soon. Bye bye.